Today I want to show you how to plant a giant pumpkin seed and how to increase your chances for a successful germination. Now, if you don't have a giant pumpkin seed of your own and you want some, go down to the description and there's a link to my website where you can buy some of my seeds, most of which are featured in this video. So when you first look at your seed, you'll notice that it's huge and that it's very thick, and sometimes that makes it difficult for the seed to actually germinate. And what we're going to do today is we're going to make it a little bit easier by filing down the edges of the seed to make it a little bit thinner and easy to pop out of. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take a basic file. I use my nail file. I clean it and disinfect it before I use it. And basically all you're going to do is you're going to file down the edge of the seed until you see a color change, and I'll show you that in the next frame. But one thing to be very careful of is you do not want to file the tip of the seed, which is that bottom part, because that is where the root comes out of. So you don't want to mess with that area. So all you're going to do is file down the seed until you see a color change. So I finished filing down the seed, and you can see the color change that I'm talking about. So on the very top you can see the seed capsule. Then it looks a little white, and that's what it initially looks like when you're filing it down. And then you just shave a little bit more down till it gets to that darker color again. So you want that all the way around the seed. And the only place you don't want it is the seed tip. You leave that part alone. So the next thing you want to do is prepare your medium. Some people would call it dirt, but it's a little bit more than that. And the product I use is in this view right now. I actually wouldn't recommend this for beginners. There's actually not much in it in terms of nutrients. It's actually designed to be nutrient free so that you can add everything that you want. What I would recommend instead is to use anything that's labeled as a seed starter, seed starting potting mix, anything that has the word seed starting in it. You don't want just potting mix, because the concentration of nutrients in potting mix is way too high and it'll burn your plant. Just because there's too many nutrients in it. So a medium designed for seed starting has nutrients in it, but at a dilute amount enough that it's perfect for your seedling. The biggest cause of failure to start your seed is either too little water, too much water, or too cold. Very rarely too hot, especially in Maine. So to help with the too dry and the too wet conditions, we're actually going to prepare the soil before we even put it in the pots. And the idea is that we're going to get the moisture level just right so that we actually don't even have to water it at all when it's in the germination process. So what I did was I put the grow mix in a large bowl, and this mix in particular is very dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add water to it. I would just add a little bit. Don't add as much as I'm going to add, because this has been sitting in my garage for 6 months. So this is super, super dry. So I'm going to add water, and I'll show you what you want your soil to look like afterwards. So I'm adding a ton of water. You most likely won't need this much. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my hands and mix it up. So the next thing we're going to do is a squeeze test to see if our soil is too dry, too wet, or just right. So what you do is you take a handful of soil, you squeeze it as hard as you can, and then you let go. Ideally, you want it to hold its shape, and you don't want it to fall apart super easy. This is pretty close, but I can just tell by feel that I want it a little wetter. And really, ideally, what will happen is you'll squeeze, 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 and just a tiny, tiny little drop will come out, and that's perfect. If you squeeze it and a bunch of drops come out, then it's too wet, so you're going to want to add some more dry mix to it to get it a little drier. So I'm going to add a little more water and then show you what perfect looks like. So here you can see an example of soil that's too wet. When I squeeze it, there's water dripping down. So that is too wet. All right, so now my soil is pretty perfect. What I did was I added a little bit of this to dry it up a little. And now what happens is I grab a handful and I squeeze it. And I get like a tiny, tiny little drip out of it, but that's it. So this is perfect. So next what we do is we grab our pot. And an important thing about pots, you don't want a pot that's too small. This pot is 1 gallon. And if you use anything smaller, the plant will become root bound in just a few days. So unless you plan on transplanting outside almost immediately, I would get a little bit bigger of a pot. What I do is I actually cut the pot down the center, and then I duct tape it together, and that makes it easier to transplant because I can just take the pot apart and lay it down more easily. As you can see, I labeled the pot so I know what I'm planting, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this perfect soil into our pot. Once I'm at the top, I do gently pat it down. This medium has a lot of perlite in it, which makes it very airy, so a little bit of compaction is totally fine. This next part is the easiest part of all, and that is the actual planting of your seed. So what you're going to do is take your seed, make sure it's pointy end down because that's where the roots come out, and you simply push it into the soil, and I go until it's about just below the soil surface. The reason being is the seed itself is already about 1 inch long, and we don't want it to go too deep or else it's going to have a hard time emerging from the soil. Some growers will go about 1/2 inch deep, which is about the depth of your fingernail, so they'll push it down until they get to the top of their fingernail. I go just to below the soil surface, and then we just make sure it's completely covered, and that is it. No watering needed because our soil is perfect. So now our seed is planted, and the question is, where do we put it? Well, my recommendation is to put it somewhere warm because the seeds prefer a temperature between 80 to 90 degrees to germinate. They will germinate in lower temperatures, but the warmer the better. So what I do is I put it right next to my wood stove. Actually, this is a pellet stove, but there's a fire and it's warm. So I put it as close to the pellet stove as I can, and that is a happy seedling. So you can see here I put this pot in a little salad container, and that's more just to keep things clean. It's just some organic spring mix from Walmart, and in addition to keeping things nice and clean, the other thing you can do is you can take the top and you can just put it right on top of that pot, and it doesn't have to be airtight. In fact, air is a good thing, and basically what that does is it helps preserve the moisture so your pot doesn't dry out. Just be aware that smaller pots will dry out quicker. Also, peat pots will dry out a lot quicker, so you still have to keep an eye on things, and if your soil looks like it's drying out quite a bit, you may have to water it, but just be careful you don't overwater it because that can cause the seed to rot. Now, if you want to take this to the next level, you could get yourself a germination mat or a seedling heat map. And what this does is you put your pot on top of it and it warms up the soil. You can get kits where you have like a plastic tub that you can put your pots in, as well as a clear plastic dome that you put over it to keep your soil from drying out, and that system works really great and it's fairly inexpensive. I will put a link in the description if you're interested in trying this method out. Now, if you want to get really advanced, you can make a germination chamber. It's actually fairly easy to make. You need a plastic tote, and instead of the lid, you want a clear plastic cover, and then inside you can see I have all my pots, and they're sitting on top of a cookie sheet, and the cookie sheet is held up by these crossbars which come out the side. Underneath we have 2 incandescent light bulbs, and the light bulbs are not for light, they are for heat. And you can see the wires going out the back, and it heats it up just enough that it gets it to about 80 to 85 degrees, and ideally we want it between 80 to 90 degrees for germination. And I have this little wireless Bluetooth thermometer that transmits the information to this, and that's room temperature 69. That's the bathroom, which is 63, and the germination chamber right now is 81 nearly. It's usually around 85, but I just took the top off. So this is the advanced way to germinate your seeds. This is totally not necessary. This is just because I spend $60 to $100 for one seed and I do not want to screw it up. So I like to have as much control as I can. Now, if you don't want to go out and buy a pot, there are tons of household items that you can use. For example, this Greek yogurt container. Just make sure you poke holes in the bottom. This doesn't have holes poked in the bottom. You either want to cut some slits or poke some holes so the water can drain. But other than that, a basic plastic container can work great as a pot. So here I have some little pots in a salad container, and these are just test germinations. I'm just testing out some seeds and making sure that they germinate. That's why they're in smaller pots. I would not recommend using pots these small because it will not support the seedling very much, because the seedling grows so quick it will outgrow these pots and become root bound within just a day or two. So if you don't have a salad container or you want to use something else, I have a few other ideas. This is just a little plate I got at Goodwill. So if you do have to water it, it just kind of drains the water for you. This is the bottom of a big yogurt container that I just cut off. And then this is the top lid of a protein powder that I used. So all of these could be used as well to put your little pots in. So I'm doing a little experiment with these seeds. They're from the 1363 Witty. I have one in my germination chamber, and these two I'm going to stick in my bathroom. My bathroom is the furthest room from my pellet stove, and it's usually between 55 and 60 degrees versus the germination chamber, which is 85 degrees. So we're going to see if that colder temperature will allow for germination, and if it does, how much longer does it take, or does it take longer? The other thing I'm going to do is one of these I'm going to overwater. This is the biggest mistake that growers make, including myself. We just get really excited about watering. So I'm going to overwater this because I'm just really excited, and I want to make sure it's watered enough. And we're going to see what happens. We're going to see if the seed rots. We'll see if it makes it. Now you can see here the guy that I overwatered, the excess water is coming out of the pot. So we'll see how well this potting medium does. Maybe it drains the water enough that even if I do overwater it, it can, you know, help me out a little bit because I'm incompetent. So the next thing we're going to do, since we don't have a germination chamber to preserve the moisture, we're going to preserve the moisture by using Saran wrap. So I just have a little piece of Saran wrap here, and then I have a rubber band, and we're just going to put the rubber band over the pot and the Saran wrap, and that'll keep it nice and wet. And we'll do it for the other one as well. Once the seed pops out, we're going to take that off. In my next video, we will see how all the seeds did. We're going to compare the seeds that were placed in warm areas versus cold areas. We'll see if the seed that was overwatered rotted or if it made it. And we'll also see what happens when you put a seedling on the windowsill versus underneath some grow lights. So stay tuned.